and we'll get you rocking and rolling. Okay, guys. Well, good evening, and can't go wrong without audio. So we'll take a look at what we have. Sharing sound, optimize. Very cool. Okay, now we're ready to rock and roll. All right, guys. Well, good to see you. And like I said, technical difficulties this morning, but we're doing a little bit better. And oh my goodness, we are entering into what is, I think, our third or fourth week, if I understand correctly. I think our third or fourth week of the semester, which is insane. And it's gone by really fast. And if it's any indication, it will probably be like that for the rest of the semester. And before you know it, 20 weeks it's going to go by really, really quickly. Okay. So tonight, we will be talking about the principles of design. So we are going to jump in and talk about principles. But before we do, I would like you guys to take a look at the discussion question on Canvas so that we can take a just kind of get your guys' sensibility and just to get a little bit of an understanding of Gestalt. So we'll take a closer look at that. In fact, I'll probably save a little bit of time and play the video for you. But let me go ahead and switch over on the discussion question so that we can get it going for you. And week 2, so here's our modules. So orientation, week 2, designer therapy. And for the next couple of weeks, we're going to be looking at the principles and elements of design, how to see like a graphic designer. And so the discussion question, which is here to the left, we're going to take a look at that and answer that and get some understandings about Gestalt and the whole concept of Gestalt psychology. Okay. And if you answer the question, great. But we're going to take a moment to just kind of take a peek at this. And this is a really good presentation on Gestalt psychology and why it's essential for good design. So we'll start with that. We'll play that video. If you got to answer the question, thank you for doing that. So that's awesome for doing that, guys. I appreciate it. But we're just going to jump in and put some points in for the evening, and we're going to take a look at this. It is part of my deck originally as well, but I really want to cover this topic first, and then I give you guys a little bit of a moment to just kind of answer the discussion question, and then we'll jump in and talk a little bit about principles of design, because the ultimate goal is for you guys to see like a designer, understand the principles of design. But first, I want you to kind of get an understanding of Gestalt psychology, okay? So let me go ahead and get that ready for you. And we will play that momentarily and get that going for you. I'll pause this. And I'm gonna go ahead and make the screen a little bit bigger. And we'll watch this for a few moments. If you need to adjust your audio, go for it. And hopefully we don't get a commercial, but we always do. And we'll take a look at what this is and take a peek. And of course, having some technical issues. So let's try refreshing that and see if it goes through. So, okay, no worries. I come prepared because I already have it on my deck. So, all right, so I'll just play it off my original deck, so then we'll go that direction. Okay, so Gestalt psychology, we'll start with the objective, and hopefully you can hear that.
When looking at this, what's the first thing you see? Do you see a bicycle? Or do you see handlebars, pedals, spokes, tires, brakes, a seat, and a frame? If you're human, I'm guessing you saw a bike. This idea that we make sense of things by seeing a whole rather than the individual parts is called Gestalt psychology, and its principles are especially important for designers in creating complete and compelling visuals. Because of psychologists Max Wertheimer, Kurt Koffka, and Wolfgang Kohler, Gestalt theory can be broken down into 6 design principles. Figure ground. the thought that when we look at a scene, we separate objects so that some are the focus or figure and others are the background.
Okay, so Gestalt is really, at the end of the day, is just a really fundamental and basic idea of how our brains put together graphics, put together information. And that's not even the principles of design, but I will say that that our brains do operate in a certain way where we take all the information and try to make it easy. Does that kind of make sense? So there are so psychologically, a lot of very talented designers have a pretty good understanding of psychology, or at least Gestalt psychology, which is this notion of the ability to kind of like see things as their whole, or essentially what this graphic is a really good example of are some of the things that our brains do to take all the information, all the complex information, and break it down into its simplest parts. Okay, so you won't have to know this for tonight or the presentation, but just know that our brain does certain things to take all that info and make it simple. It closes gaps when there's gaps. It tries to find similarities, right? And it tries to continue things when it's broken. So it tries to find an order to things, and things that are similar are really, really key. So most of the time it's trying to make sense of the world. Everyone tries to make sense of the world through these principles, okay? And so I don't want to overwhelm you with the principles and what they are specifically, but you kind of got a little bit of a look at what it looks like on the video, if that makes sense, okay? So at some level, all human beings take graphic information and they basically try to break it down into its simplest parts. And that happens through our eyes, okay? 90% of information comes through the eyes, okay? Half of your brain is processing that information that comes through the eyes, right? And 60,000 times, when we look at images, your brain processes 60,000 times faster than reading, okay? So visuals and images is the way to go. That's where you communicate more information with graphics than anything else. And if you really think about it, if you think about like social media and graphics and photos and memes, like in general, we use pictures to communicate emotions because pictures, say 1,000 words, right? A picture can say 1,000 words. So there's a lot that kind of goes into those images, and 70% of your senses, or the receptors of our senses, come from our eyes. So biologically, our bodies are wired to pick up a lot of information through the eyes. And so half that brain power is being processed. 90% is coming in through the eyes. I mean, we have senses, yes, but a lot of that information is coming in through the eyes. So visually speaking, as designers, we kind of have a big role because our brains are doing way more through our eyes anyway. And being an educator, we try to make things as visual as possible so that we can understand. So that's kind of the idea, okay, at the end of the day, okay? And the objective for today is to understand the principles, understand and apply, I would say, the principles of design. So we're going to kind of break that down, look it over. But before we do, I like for you guys to take at least 5 minutes to answer the discussion question, and just to kind of give a little bit of a understanding of Gestalt. Okay, so I know we just saw the video. If you want to play it one more time, that's okay. But what what makes good design, right? Why do we see what we see? And what helps our brains perceive the world around us, okay? So just take a couple of moments, let's give it about 5 minutes just to answer the discussion question while I handle all the noise behind me. But take a moment to answer that question and then we'll go from there, okay? 5 minutes, okay? All right, guys. So hopefully we're looking pretty good with the question there. Let me go ahead and take a quick peek at some of your replies just to make sure. All right, so far it's looking pretty good here. And if you're about to finish, anyone still writing by any chance? You give me a little thumbs up emoji. Okay, take a couple more minutes, guys, and we'll set it up. We'll get started in just a couple of moments. All right, guys, and if you're just finished, or anyone's still typing, maybe give a little thumbs up emoji. Actually, we'll do that and get you there. Okay. Perfect. Okay. We'll take a couple moments, and then I'll kind of preface it a little bit with the principles of design, and we'll go forward from there. Okay. So before we kind of go into principles of design on the assignments, is everything making sense for everyone in the whole process of of how we're going to go about it in terms of just like procedures? This week, it's going to kind of level off a little bit more closely to what we did last week, where we have like a discussion post. We have the assignment followed in part by like videos from tonight and then Thursday. So we'll have those recordings posted into our week 3, week 4 module. And so when you're going through it, every discussion, every assignment is basically a series of points, okay? So last week, I know there was a little bit of confusion, like what's due tonight? My goal is to lecture, okay, as quickly as I can about the content, and then create and practice the exercise so that for the remaining half of class, we can work on it. So half lecture, half lab time where you can start to create, okay? And I promise you guys that that the theory, once we're done with this component for this week, which is theory, slightly into next, and we're going to get into Adobe Illustrator the technical principles of it, okay? So in the beginning, it's a lot of front loading of principles, right? We talk a lot about theory, talk about like personal preferences, habits, lifestyle, more mindset, growth mindset specifically, and then we get into the actual tools, right? I could teach you the tools, but but then so could any YouTube video. So the idea is that, oh, well, let me go ahead and offer you guys some sort of like some wisdom and some knowledge based on lifestyle, based on pricing, finance, things of that sort. And then let's go into how we see as a designers, followed in part like how we're gonna look at the technical tools, right? So that once you have the theory established, a firm foundation, as I say, then we can start building the tools and understand how to draw a pen tool, layout, minimalism. We go into all those layers, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. So we start off with foundation. We start off with the principles of design, graphic design, basically, and then we throw in the tools on top of that. So that's how we kind of layer it a little bit. And so we're gonna go forward from there, okay? So discussions will be obviously those 10 points we were saying. Assignments are gonna be, obviously tonight's assignment or this week's assignment is gonna be going into 80 points because there's a good level of writing involved. And then I changed the name from activity to assignment so that everyone knows where is the assignment. So there you go. So it should be very clear, and hopefully it's making a lot more sense this week than ever before, okay? And so my window for lecturing is getting smaller and smaller, and so that we get more time to work and understand and apply some of the tools in the class, okay? So that's kind of the idea around it. And we also resolve some of the Adobe Illustrator software issues. So everyone should technically have the program operating and running. If it's still not installed on your computers, please do so immediately and open that thing and try a new document. Make sure it's not running really slow, because if it is, then we're gonna need to find some computer alternatives, okay? So if it installs and we haven't launched it, you might wanna launch it, maybe open up a new document, maybe take the brush tool and the pen tool and start wiggling around and making sure that it's, when you swipe with the mouse or with your Wacom, it follows, and it doesn't take 20 minutes for it to show up on your screen, right? So we want to definitely not experience any delays in the program. Okay, very cool. All right, so let's continue and let's go ahead and move forward on the principles of design. Tonight I'm basically going to show you how I see design, how most designers interpret design, how most artists view art, design. And so we're going to kind of walk you through this while we still got some energy, while the coffee or the caffeine is flowing in your blood, because this is going to take some mental power, okay? It kind of operates on deconstruction. So when we analyze a design, we deconstruct. And so when you break a design down and you deconstruct it to its basic parts, what do? You know how all the parts work, and then you can rebuild again. Does that kind of make sense? If you've ever taken apart anything, a clock, a watch, I don't know, maybe your iPhone, and looked on the inside, at some point you're going to kind of understand something about how the machine or how the thing works by breaking it down, by deconstructing it. And then when you rebuild it, well, you'll know how and you'll know why. Does that make sense? So this is going to take some critical thinking, and we're going to dive in, and I'm going to walk you through this process. So there's going to be a significant portion of writing here. Okay, so going back to my tool over here, what exactly are we doing today? Just going back, we are going to understand and apply the principles of design, and we're going to do that using some writing methods. Okay, so understand and apply the principles of design. Okay, and how many of you guys have heard this content before, or maybe have learned this in some level in high school or in other schools in the past, or in a class in the past? Maybe you can, okay, most no, others, some say yes. Okay, so if it's a refresher, that's great. All right, guys, well, let's jump in, okay? It'll be a great refresher, and maybe we'll take it a little bit deeper. Okay, so our eyes, we already talked about that, how our eyes interpret images. If I was gonna show you this, this particular image, what would be like the first thing that you see in this image? Just, out of curiosity, like what's like the first thing that you would notice? You can type it in the chat there, but what's the first thing you notice in this image? Okay, it's a little distorted, it's a little pixelated, I get it, but what's the first thing? What is that first thing that you notice? And then you can type it in the chat, or you can voice it in. in your audio, whichever you feel comfortable. But what's the first thing that you sort of notice in this, just out of curiosity? Okay. Okay, so trees. Okay, some of us say the mountain, the colors. Okay. Grass. Okay. Trees in the foreground, forest and mountains. Okay. The hills. Okay. Great. Okay. Well, whatever that first thing is, okay, whatever you zoned in on, we call that the subject, right? So the first thing that you notice is the subject. Designers are really good at creating the focal point or the first thing. Does that make sense? So it's not by accident. We actually do a really good job of guiding people's eyes by starting with the first thing, okay? The focal point, right? And so how that's done, there's so many different ways, but at the end of the day, it's very basic. It's like, what's that simple thing? And this goes back to Gestalt psychology, right? Now, our brains want to take all the complex information, break it down to its simplest parts and say, that's a tree. Does that kind of make sense? Or all those lines and those shapes, that's a mountain. So the first thing we obviously notice is the most simplest thing. And that's how our brains take it. They take all this information and say, okay, out of all this I've seen, I notice a tree, I notice a mountain, I notice a grass. That's the first thing I notice. So you're already experiencing Gestalt, right? By breaking it down to its basic parts by that first thing that you notice, okay? So psychologically, that's natural. And we're doing it naturally right now by asking the simple question, the first thing, okay? But if you would ask yourself, what is the tree or the swamp or the forest or the mountains, then we would know that those things are made up of lines, which could be straight lines, squiggly lines, shapes, which could be two types, geometric or natural / organic shapes, as it's also called. Then there's the lightness and the darkness of the shape or the tree or the mountain, which is the value, followed by the space, which is like where it is in relationship to the others. Is it in the foreground or the background? Is it big? Is it a small tree? Is it a big tree? Is it a big mountain or a small mountain or a small swamp or a big swamp? That's the size. Sometimes you'll notice textures if you're close enough and you can almost feel it. And definitely there's color, because we know that color communicates emotions, right? But these are the elements of design, okay? The ingredients, not the recipe, but the ingredients to that image, okay? So as I look at an image, right, I start with my obvious, and then I kind of work backwards, and I start off with asking the question like, oh, what's the focal point? What's that first thing I notice? Okay. And I just get to experience it for the first time, and I just react to it emotionally. If I like it, if I don't like it. Then my brain starts going into the elements, okay? And I start breaking things down because good designers know how to like break it down quickly, subconsciously or consciously, and they kind of store it away in their tools, in their toolkit for future designs, okay? And so that's kind of how we look at the world a little bit. We deconstruct, we appreciate, we love, we deconstruct, that's awesome. And then we go through this process of elements and then principles, as I'll share in a moment. So let's start with elements, okay? Cool, this is great, awesome. So if I look at this, and you said it was the trees or the mountains or the forest, let's just break this down and go with the lines on the upper left. Okay, so if I look at the tree, let's say the tree was the first thing you notice, then what I ask myself is, oh, okay, well, what are the lines? Like, what kind of lines make up that tree? Is it straight lines, as the image portrays in that little graphic on the upper right-hand side? Is it circular lines? Is it, or curvy lines, right? It's only 3 types, right? Curved, circular, straight, or curved lines. But what kind of lines makes up that tree? You can type it in the chat, or you can voice it in, but what kind of lines would you call that if you had to pick one out of the 3? Straight, curvy, or round? What kind of lines would that be? And if you look at that, I mean, the obvious answer would be that they're curvy. Exactly, Alexis. So we're noticing that we have curvy lines, okay? So my brain says, okay, those are curvy lines. Okay, now those curvy lines combine to make a certain shape, right? And there's 2 types of shapes in the world. We have, or in the 2-dimensional world, I should say, there are 2 types of shapes. There are geometric shapes, and then there's organics, or otherwise known as natural shapes? So obvious question, what kind of, those curved lines are crossing and creating shapes, which are what kind of shapes? Are they geometric shapes or are they organic shapes? What would you think they are? And then the obvious answer, well, yeah, it would definitely be they're made up of natural shapes or organic shapes, right? Because only the natural environment, the organic world, right? Plants, natural environment, those shapes only come from the natural, right? So we're noticing organic shapes. Okay. Now let's talk about the value or the lightness and the darkness of the colors. Okay. Would you say that those trees are light colors or dark colors? If you had to constitute that, and you could type it in the chat as well and mention that as well. So what are those colors that it's made of, right? Yeah, it's dark colors, right? Some might say light in some areas. I would think of it in terms of like a spectrum, like is it mostly dark or mostly light or maybe in the middle, okay? So it's not so much black and white, although we're starting off with like, binary in a way, one or the other, but it's mostly dark, right? Predominantly dark colors. Okay, now we'll look at the spacing, okay? In terms of the spacing, would you say those trees are closer to the viewer or away from the viewer, right? Are they close to us visually? If you're in that forest, let's say, would you say that those trees are closer to you? Or would you say that they're further away from you? Okay. We also call that foreground or background, right? But I don't want to add any complicated term. We'll just say, is it closer to you, those trees, or are they further away? Okay. If you want to compare it to something, maybe compare it to the mountain. Are those trees closer to you compared to the mountain or further away from you compared to the mountain? Okay. So now we're kind of contextualizing the image and looking at two things, okay? So is it closer to you or further away than the mountain? And then, yeah, Kaiser, yeah, absolutely. They're definitely closer to you. So now we got a sense of space, okay? Let's keep going in this clock, right? I'm going kind of clockwise, if you notice in the sheet. Are these trees big compared to the trees behind them, let's say? Are these large trees compared to the trees closest to the mountain or in that background? Or are they smaller, okay? Basically, that's the sizing or the scale and the proportion. So are they closer, are they bigger, or are they smaller compared to the mountain, I guess you could say. And you can mention that and type that in the chat as well. So in terms of size, are these big trees compared to the mountain because they're closer to you, or were they smaller to you compared to the mountain? And you can mention that as well, okay? So in terms of size, you can say that. And some people can say, well, it's bigger. It's smaller compared to the mountain, but it's definitely bigger in relationship to the canvas or the actual frame of the picture. It's all relative according to perception, right? But in the frame of the picture, it's a little bit closer to you, okay? And then of course we'll say textures. I would say if we saw this in an art gallery and it's an oil painting, which it is, then we'll notice textures. So we'll just say that it has textures. But what about the colors? What kind of colors do you notice in this image? What specifically are the colors you notice? Maybe your monitor is a little off, or maybe the color's not accurate, but based on what you see in your screen right now, what are the colors that you're noticing on it there? Is there one color? Are there two or maybe three colors? And maybe are those colors light in value or light shade or dark shade, right? The more detail, the better. But what are the colors that you're noticing in this image? Are they greens and browns? Are they yellows and dark browns perhaps? But what are the colors that you're noticing in the image? And you can type that in as well. Okay. So we see some gray, some teal on top there. Yeah. Okay, depending. And again, I understand monitors are calibrated differently, but based on what you're seeing right now, let's just be true to what your experience and what you're seeing right now. Okay. Okay. So we basically together, what we did was we just deconstructed this image according to elements of design. Okay. And be happy because these are the elements of design across the board, and you never have to do more than this to a degree, right? When it comes to the elements. So here's a new set of tools for your toolkit, right? If you can walk away memorizing or understanding the elements of design, lines, shapes, values, spaces, size, textures, colors, then you are halfway through this game of design. Does that kind of make sense? By breaking it down into as simple as parts, right? Because that's what everything constitutes at the end of the day when it comes to images, right? These are the elements of design. This is not a 2000 thing. This is like a forever natural thing that happens in all images throughout human history. Okay, now, what is the subject of this image then? Okay, and when I say subject, what's the first thing you notice? Okay, so what is the subject of this image? Okay, not the type of style or the type of art, but but what do you see or what do you notice, and what looks, what is that focal point, I guess you can say, and that you notice in the image? Okay, yeah, I would say predominantly we notice what looks like a fox or a fox's head or an abstract shape of a fox's head, okay, or shapes surrounding that. Okay, that would be your subject, right? And you see about 2 foxes' heads, right? That's true, James, right? It's one vertical, the other one horizontal. So we see about what looks like 2 images there, right? Or 2 foxes' head for the most part. Okay, great. So that's your subject, right? Now, if we were going to say what elements are at work with it, looking at your sheet, can you list for me, okay, what the elements are at work? So what are the lines? What are the shapes? What are the values? Spacing, size, texture, colors? If you had to kind of like do one for every category, then what would you identify each one as for this image? Okay. Take a moment and we'll just go and process it out. If you want to list it, that's fine too. But what do you notice? What kind of lines? What kind of shapes? Okay. Is it light or is it dark in color? In terms of the space, is it bigger or smaller compared to another subject on the page? Is it big or is it small? The fox's head, let's just say. What's the colors that you see? What are the textures? Okay. Try to type that in for me for just a moment, like just to kind of, let's kind of deconstruct and just take as far as what do you see? Okay. In this deconstruction process. Okay. Well, I would say, Laker, it's tell me more specifically the lines, shapes, colors, brightnesses, spaces, size. How much can you kind of identify based off of the chart on the left for the image on the right? Okay. Okay, Kaiser. So then technically there's one for every item. So the question is, can you see that? And let's go ahead and kind of break that down. Okay. So let's just go down the list. Okay. And you were typing, that's great. Okay. So for lines, okay, do we see straight, curvy, line, or round lines? Straight and curvy is typically the common. So what do we notice? Do we notice straight lines or curvy lines in this particular image of the fox? I guess you could say the subject. What would you say is that? Okay.
We have straight lines.
Okay, absolutely, Derek. Yeah, we definitely see straight lines. Okay. Followed by the shape. So those straight lines connect to make a certain type of shape. So you're thinking, oh, there's two, geometric or organic. So then what's the conclusion we can make from those shapes? They are
Geometric.
Geometric shapes. Okay. So then your brain instantly goes to the values, or sometimes it can go towards the spaces. Let's just go to spaces because we created a shape. Okay. So the spacing on it, right? Like, is it, is there a lot of empty space, or is it filled up for the most part? Is there something in front, something in back, let's say? What would you say you identify the space of this, or the spacing of all the elements that are laid out there? Spacing is an interesting thing. So we can say, do we see more of or less than these geometric shapes?
Well, I think there's a lot of shapes.
A lot of shapes, right?
Yeah.
So filled up space, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's more within the space itself. So it's pretty filled up, I guess you can say.
Mhm.
No real sense of a background or foreground or front and back, as they say. So your brain is saying, okay, that's cool. Now, now you can even say, well, maybe the sizes, if everything's filled up, then are the sizes different from these shapes? Are they big? Are they small? Are they relatively the same, would you say, in terms of the sizes? And there's
All the shapes seem around the same size.
about the same size. Okay. So instantly those are the options there. So then your mind goes to like, okay, well, I got my sizes, my spaces down, right? And now I'm thinking color. Okay, color, right? And so, what kind of colors do you notice first within the image and that stand out to you? So what are those colors that you notice within that image that are standing out? The dominant colors, I'd say, are the predominant
Red,
colors.
because it seems to be the brightest.
Yeah, we see a lot more reds, right? Predominant of red, or a lot of red, mostly red, right? With some highlights or a little bit of, blue, green, more or less, right? Black, of course, here and there, or maybe a little bit more black than we do see green and teal. So mostly red, probably a little bit after that black, right? And highlights of like teal and blue or green here and there, right? And then we can even say, are these reds, blacks? Are they light colors? Are they dark colors? And we can even include that as well. So, would you call those bright reds or dark reds necessarily, or light reds or dark reds, would you say?
I certainly see more light on the top left, and then it's more dark on the bottom right.
Okay, so you're saying both light and dark colors, right? Maybe you can zone in and say, oh, do you see mostly darks or mostly lights? And then we can kind of narrow it down to the groups there.
Yeah, mostly darks.
Mostly darks, right? So right there, right, like this circle that we just did, that's literally what my brain does as I look at something, right? Sometimes people look at the colors first, and that's great. If you're a color person and you're like, hey, I look at colors first, professor, and then I go to shapes, and then I look at the lines and then the shapes after, and then the spaces. Great, do that, right? I typically look at like the lines and the shapes followed by colors a little bit last, right? And even good designers know how to blast your face with color first, and they scream colors and they force you to look at color, right? So if there's no one or right or wrong way to do it, if you're like, oh, I noticed the colors first, then lean into that, right? But then all our minds should be going towards light and dark colors, right? Then we go into straighter curvy lines, then it's geometric natural shapes, and then light and dark colors, right? Or excuse me, spacing, right? Do we see more of, less than, and are they big and are they small? And do those things have like textures to it? Does that kind of make sense? So they go through this kind of like list, or like kind of like this process, like kind of like this circular thing where you're breaking everything down. If your brain's hurting, then it should, because this is how it all kind of works out. The more you do, the better you get. And when you like the art, it's easier to appreciate and break it down into as simple as parts. So I do, yes, when you're learning this, it's like, but I don't like that art. Don't worry about it. This actually, the assignment is all about the art that you like. The people learn principles of design really well when it's the art they like. Does that make sense? Because it makes sense, right? You like it, you want to break it down, and you want to make stuff like it, right? Because that's what you like. So we lean into that. So this assignment is all about your art, your photos, your designs, your anime, whatever that's out there that you like graphically. This assignment will break it down, and you'll be deconstructing it. Does that make sense? So it's not an art history class where you have to learn, medieval Roman art, and then you're like, oh my God, I don't even like this. I don't know why, and I don't even understand it. I have been there, I've done those hours, and it's not pleasant. At the end of the day, we should start with the stuff that you like, get you emotionally confident with it, knowing that you can break those things down that you like visually. And then in time, you will end up in graphic design history, and you'll end up maybe in Roman art, and maybe you'll end up in Mediterranean, art or design. Wherever you end up, we start with first, what do you like, and what are the principles for that? Does that make sense? So that's really where we go with this stuff, right? I did it the other way, where I ended up in an art history class, and it was Roman, and I didn't know anything about Roman history. I didn't know anything about the Bible or the stories behind it, which was illustrated through the art. So I had no impact of the story that was being portrayed through the art. So I was completely culturally oblivious to it, and therefore I didn't understand it, right? But when somebody said, take a look at this anime, bro, or take a look at this street art, or take a look at this, let me break this down for you. Oh, now it relates. It now becomes relevant. Does that make sense? And so relevancy is key. This is what it's all about. So we want to lean into the stuff that we like, and then you'll see the principles and you'll adapt. And here's the nice part about it, is that if you like it, these are you'll know the elements and the principles that you can bring into your designs. I want it to look like that. Great. Go for it. What are the elements? Well, these are the colors. Okay, great. And these are the principles. Okay, great. So what do you want to do? Well, I kind of want to do like my own character or my own drawing or my own photograph, but using these principles. Okay, great. Guess what? That's design, right? That's literally how this stuff works. Some people can break it down. Others kind of intuitively see it. I think I do a pretty good job of breaking it down so far. So we'll see. Does that kind of make sense? So it is a little bit of a stretch on your brain, but it doesn't feel as much of a stretch when you like the art and you bring in your art that you like and you appreciate and you love. And maybe it's your own work too. So it won't hurt as much, I guess you can say. It won't stretch your brain. Okay, so we're halfway there, and we will talk about principles of design, okay? So we talked about the elements, right? We just successfully did it together as a class. What are the lines? What are the elements of a design? We actually broke it down in like less than 5 minutes, more or less, right? So we broke that down. Okay, those are the ingredients, okay? Now the principles are sort of like the directions or the recipe and how you can make it all work together on a screen or on a canvas or on an art board, as they call them, right? So how do these all kind of interplay with each other? What decisions do I need to make to the shapes and the lines and the colors to make this thing work? Does that make sense? So where are my decisions? What can I choose to do with the shapes, the colors, the lines, Professor? Like where do I begin and where do I end? It's right here in front of you, okay? These are the principles of design, like the principles, right? The stuff that lives for thousands of years, right? And will still live on beyond us after we're long gone. This is stuff that endures, okay? Now, there's 6 principles that all design has. I'm gonna run through all of them, but I'll give you the cheat sheet now, okay? Every successful design, I don't care where you're from or where you're at, every design, photograph, no matter what, will always have these core, okay? These 6 core, okay? You will always have contrast. I will explain that in a moment. You will always have focal points. You will always have a sense of balance. There will always be some type of scale. There will be some type of harmony that brings it together. And there will be some type of variety that also gives it a little bit of difference, right? Not everything is pattern. Not everything is rhythm. Not everything is, well, surreal. I would say good design typically has a sense of abstraction though. And that's the secret sauce. I would say that if you can understand, and let me use my square here, if you can understand this and understand that this is sort of your secret sauce to bringing someone into your world, then you will always have very great design, okay? And this is coming from the greats. These are from the legendary designers, right? To some degree, they say, you know, all good design has, you know, focus and this and blah, and it sounds so beautiful and so poetic, but I'm more practical. At the end of the day, you will always have the red arrows, and the secret sauce is the red box, because people get interested when they see a little bit of abstraction in the design. It looks like this, but it also looks like that. It kind of looks like this. It kind of looks like that. I don't know if it's this or that. Guess what? You've just created curiosity, and now you brought them into your design for longer than 10 seconds. Does that make sense? So the level of time someone looks at your design is indirectly related to the level of abstraction in the design. Does that make sense? So the less clear or somewhat distorted something is, the more interesting it becomes, because we have Gestalt psychology. Our brains are trying to make something out of nothing. And so it's trying to make order from chaos, and it's making assumptions. It's saying, oh, look, this cloud looks like a baby. This cloud looks like a tree. This cloud looks like that. Does that make sense? So abstraction is really the key. It's truly the key to a great design. So you will always see it, you will always notice it, but there are 6 core. Really good designers bring in the abstract, and knowing how will be my job throughout this semester. Okay, so that's the goal. That's why we do theory first, foundation. So these are the 6. Now let me show you some pictures and break it down. These, you know, not only 6 but 7, 8, 9, 10. Let's break it down. Let's take a look. Let's actually see these samples. Okay, and if this is making sense for you guys, you can give a little thumbs up emoji. Cool, this makes sense, Professor. Get it. This is right. Right on. Where were you in, you know, all my life? Okay, I've been here. I've been sitting in Whittier. So you found me. There you go. So this is what great designers are. Okay, and if you're new to design, okay, this stuff doesn't go away. This will come back in some way, shape, or form. Okay, with you. So just know this now and forever be happy. Okay, so let's talk about this. Okay, now. We all know this. I start with the most obvious one. I start with a principle that is very magical, as some of the greats artists say, is this sense of repeating and pattern. So simple, right? But yet, when you see something repeat over like one flower, and it repeats over and over again, there's something pretty magical and amazing about just an endless copy of one pretty thing, right? Or a beautiful thing. So repetition is or pattern is a principle of design, but I would actually argue, some would argue and say, like, you know, this is probably the most magical, right? Meaning, like, we can't understand why is it that when something repeats over and over again, it brings a sense of balance or peace, or you can write a whole poem about it, right? But pattern is key. Now pattern, I show you 2 images. The pattern on the left is like 100% repeat, right? But the pattern on the right, well, it's not really a pattern, right? It's kind of like 20% of graphics that are repeating, or 20% of flowers or shapes. Do you kind of notice that? I still see like an abstract sort of male and female figure, but I see like a pattern repeating, and it's about 30 to 40%. This whole spectrum of like 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 to 100 principles. What makes principles of design so amazing is that even though I showed you the 6 core, there's still like a range of 0 to 100 for each one of those 6. Does that make sense? So can you imagine there's like 600 different variations you can create, right? And if you break it down like to its subtleties, there's an endless array of options. And that's what makes this world so interesting, is the fact that it's like 0 to 100% for each principle, and you decide how much or how little something goes. Can be a little overwhelming when you think about it, but in the beginning, I just see it as like, let's just start with the 6, okay, and work our way up from there. Okay, contrast. Contrast. Man, we hear this all the time, but what does it really mean? Contrast is really about the differences at the end of the day. So contrast is the differences. So when something is different from something else, we notice that, right? It's life, it's relationships, right? You know, he or she is so different. They're so different. And so we love the differences, right? Or the colors. Wow, this, we contrast colors, and the different colors make us stand out, right? And so it's all about the differences. And at the end of the day, this is probably the number one fundamental contrast, or a principle of design is contrast. When you can search for contrast, it is amazing. And there's 3 types. It's hard to see in the sheet here, but there are 3 types of contrast, and I'll share it with you in our document. But the 3 types are sizes, big and small, right? Shapes, organic, natural, okay, or excuse me, geometric and natural, and size, shape, and color, right? So those are the 3 ranges of contrast, to be honest with you. So I can make something stand out or contrast by, by making it a different color, like the tree. It's a black tree with a white background and this black and white image from Ansel Adams, amazing photographer, right? I can make the color, I can make the butterfly stand out in red and contrast that with the blue background with the Salvador Dali painting on the right? So I can contrast that. I can contrast the sizes, a big tree versus the small trees in the background. I can contrast the butterflies, giant butterflies on this canvas versus these small mountains in the background, right? And shapes, right? I can have these beautiful organic shapes happening in the tree, but then the sky looks like almost like this sort of perfect rectangle, like a white rectangle in the frame of the photo, right? Versus the butterflies that are organic and or somewhat structured, I would say, versus the sort of geometric or plain look of the image on the left for Salvador Dali. Okay, so contrasting sizes, shapes, and colors, and you can do 1, you can do 2, or you can do all 3. Okay, but at the end of the day, contrast revolves around those 3. Okay, does that make sense? So contrast is key. And so knowing those differences is you'll learn more about, but those are the contrasts, okay? All right, core principle is emphasis. When you contrast something, when something looks different, or in the Spanish language, contra, when it's against or different something, you're creating a focus, right? Oh, those two, he or she is so different. I noticed that couple. You've just created a focus, right? And so now you stand out. Now you're, as some people call it, it pops, right? And so what they're really saying is contrast, and that contrast is creating a focal point. That's really what pop is. But make it pop. I used to have one of my old bosses used to say, just make it look bitchin'. And I'm like, what? And I was like, yeah, yeah, it is, Philip. And so I was like, okay, do you mean contrast? You want this to basically have more of a contrast? Yeah, whatever you guys do to make it like stand out, make it look good. I'm like, oh God, he's talking about contrast and focal point. But that was the top one, make it look bitchin'. And so that's ultimately the idea, right? So when you contrast something, it stands out. When it stands out, that's your emphasis or your focus, your focal point. So when you look at this painting on the left from Jim Dine, obvious, what's the focal point? What's the first thing you notice in that image on the left? Okay, we see a what? Okay, you can include the color too, right? Yeah, absolutely. We see a red heart. We see an organic shape of a heart, contrasting different than the geometric shape of the squares in the background. We see a contrast red color. Okay, we see a heart, a contrasting red versus its opposite color blue. Okay, we see a bright color heart versus a dark color background. Do we see how it's all kind of playing, right? We see a big heart versus small squares in the background. And so that's emphasis, right? So see how the contrast is playing all at once and it's making the heart stand out, which is your focal point, right? So you kind of work a contrast using elements to create a focus. Designers know how to do that really well. So I would say if I had to shut down the class and I'd say, okay, there's one thing I want you guys to remember, it would probably be know your elements of design, know contrast, the 3 types of contrast, and go forth from there. Okay. And then you will create some pretty successful designs. I mean, there's more to it, obviously, but those are at the core. Like know your elements, no contrast, no focal point, and you'll get about 80% of the way through in this design world. Does that kind of make sense? And people will always try to write books and say more or less, but I'm like, no. The core fundamentals, the fundamental principle is that there is a contrast that's creating a focal point, and there's elements at play that are creating, and there's certain principles at play using elements to create the contrast and the focal point. Okay, and that's it. Boom, class is over. Done. Right? That's what I would have you guys walk away from and remember, if anything. If you don't remember anything from this class, remember this part. Does that make sense? And so just remember that, okay? And you're good to go. Okay. All right, professor, but what if I wanted to make it, I don't want it in the middle of the page. Not everything's in the middle of the page, right? I should have mentioned Gustav Klimt before I do that. So Gustav Klimt, obviously the focal point in the image on the right. What's the first thing you notice in this painting on the right of the woman? Okay, would you say that you notice the dress, or would you notice the hair? I got a little ahead of myself. I got very excited. Sometimes I get ahead of myself. But you notice what? Her face. Yeah, the hair, her face. Why? Well, we talked about the color, right? Remember, if anything, what's the contrast, right? Well, that's the focus, professor. Okay, what's contrasting? Sizes, shapes, or colors? Oh, well, her hair is contrasting the size, right, in her face, right? Big, small. The shape of her hair is different than the rest of the body, yeah. And the color, right, is darker than the rest. Oh, yeah. So that's the contrast, right? Using those elements of art. That's a focal point. That's what's being contrasted. So therefore, it is a focus. That is the focal point, right? So we see her hair, her eyes. We see a touch of color in the cheeks and then the lips, and all of a sudden we start to notice intentionally the artist or the designer bringing you to her face. Her dress is beautiful, right? There's no doubting that there's something happening in her figure, in the dress. It might be her wedding day. I don't know. It could be an event of some sort, but there's something that's happening that is bringing the focus to her hair, and that is there's lighter colors in the entire image, but yet we see a focal point in her hair, her eyes, her mouth, and her nose. I would say the artist is enamored, is in love, is just completely sees her and appreciates her for who she is and how he sees her. And this is how he sees her. He sees something absolutely beautiful within her hair, her eyes, her nose, her mouth, her cheeks. It's quite a romantic piece. And then at the same time, there's a sense of movement in the dress. It almost seems like it's animated in a way, but still. So there's something to be said, right? And then you can write a whole essay about the why, right? but we know, but the focal point in the contrast brought us to her face, and now we ask the question, why, right? And good designers can do that. We can actually, good designers know how to guide the viewer to a certain area and just make you sit and watch and appreciate and just kind of meditate on it and ask the question, why, right? And the longer you can do that, the more you have made a successful design. Does that make sense? Our world does consist of, some type of advertising and marketing. I do understand that, but but you can make anything beautiful if you kind of see it from more of a humane standpoint. Okay, so I'm gonna stop being romantic there, but that's sort of how it flows. Okay, on it there. So I'm gonna definitely have a conversation with my wife. You know why I like you, your face, your contrast. I'm gonna just throw that out there tonight, and then fellas, you can steal that from me if you have anybody there, or ladies too. You never know. Okay, so when we see this amazing image and we see the focal point, okay, professor, but I don't want it to be in the middle. Like, can I like move it around and arrange my focus, my focal point? Yeah, absolutely. That's called balance. And when you move something around the page, there's two types of balance, right? There's the symmetrical balance, which is basically a fancy term for what's on the left is equal to what's on the right. Okay, so if I took my fancy drawing shape here, and this is a Leonardo da Vinci painting, right? Last Supper, and basically it's symmetrical means the same, right? If I took this image and I drew like a red square around it, and then I drew a line down the middle of that square, okay, then basically what's on the left would be symmetrical or similar to what's on the right, okay, or predominantly. Does that make sense? So you'll notice that the architecture, the building, everything Da Vinci did was almost equal on the left as is on the right, okay? Now, with the exception of something in the center. Now, who's that in the center? Obviously, for those of us that have a Catholic or Christian, background, that is the figure of Christ, right? So Da Vinci made it very clear that he wanted to create a symmetrical image for the explicit purposes of putting Christ in the center. Does that make sense? And so that's a focus, right? So he uses balance to create a focus. Don't get me wrong, there's color, right? Obviously, we see a contrast of, red and what looks like teal, or red and blue, right? Obviously, there's a little bit of, symmetry happening in the figure there. But when you break this down, there's contrast of colors, and right, in Jesus's figure, he's in the center of the image, which is symmetrical, and Da Vinci's trying to tell us something with that. It's symbolism at its best, right? And so symmetrical, all it means is what's on the left is equal to what's on the right, okay? And that's going from left to right, not top to bottom, okay? Left to right. And so, or right to left in different cultures, but it's basically horizontal, right? Fold down the middle. So that's symmetrical. A lot of first-year designers, they love symmetry, right? There's nothing wrong with symmetry. I have nothing wrong with symmetry, but don't stay there, because there's another type of balance that you can do. And this is one that you see a lot in the museums, unless you're Da Vinci and you have a powerful statement that you want to make with symmetry. But most of the time, I would argue that design is asymmetrical, okay? Now, if you don't know what asymmetrical means, think of it as like symptomatic versus asymptomatic. I hate to use that as an analogy, but symptoms, I see something. Asymptomatic, I have no symptom, right? So symmetrical is left to right balance in the middle. Asymmetrical means there is no left to right balance in the middle. It's the opposite of that. Does that make sense? And so asymmetrical is doing the same thing. You're gonna, in your mind's eye, you're gonna look at that canvas, that painting, that screen, that mobile phone, whatever size it is, doesn't matter, big, tiny, small, mobile watch, doesn't matter the scale of it. If I took this image and I went around the screen or the canvas and I drew a line down the middle, then what's on the left does not equal what's on the right. And very clearly we notice that, right? In this painting by James Whistler, we notice that what's on the left is what looks like a sort of a geometric sort of drapery almost, right? We notice this sort of geometric frame happening in the graphic. We see the image within that. We see a lot of geometry going on here, right? On the left-hand side. And then when we go to the right, it's not that at all, right? The what's on the left is not equal to what's on the right. As a matter of fact, what's that shape we see here? There's two types, right? We have geometric and we have organic. So this figure, forgive me, it's very choppy because I'm using a mouse to draw. These are curves. These are organic shapes. The human body is an organic form, right? So everything here is organic, predominantly organic. Very, very interesting. So all design to some degree is, or good design or good art, I believe, and I say, and you can even do the numbers, is predominantly asymmetrical, okay? Predominantly asymmetrical. Walk any museum and you will find out that most great pieces or works of art are asymmetrical, right? Few are symmetrical, but I would say most of them are asymmetrical. So guess what your designs are going to be in your career, okay? Your designs are going to be predominantly asymmetrical, okay? Now, if you're doing mobile apps and websites and things like that, don't get me wrong, there's a time and a place for symmetry, because you don't want buttons to be asymmetrical and you're like, where's the buttons for this thing? Wow, I'm going nuts. Function, obviously, ease of use is a factor, but when you're designing anything, you want to gather the viewer's attention, asymmetrical all the way, guys, okay? And most websites do that pretty well. They kind of do images asymmetrically and then the buttons are symmetrical. Does that make sense? And so there's kind of like a layer to that world for web. But when it comes to design in this class, we want to live asymmetrically, okay? So asymmetrical is the way to go. That's your best friend, is asymmetrical, okay? So we're gonna live in the asymmetrical world, okay? If that makes sense, email a thumbs up emoji, but that's the idea. What's on the left does not equal what is on the right, okay? So your designs will always be good when they're asymmetrical, okay? Okay. Now we know proportion and scale, right? Big, small, right? This is a lovely example of that by Gustav Caillebotte. And this particular image obviously has different scales of figures, right? We see people of different sizes, different scales. And for sure, we see a contrast of size, right? So what's the largest thing you see here in this image? The largest figure that you see here, I would argue, is this couple here in the center, right? They are significantly larger than the rest of the figures in the background, right? So they are a focal point. So that's scale and proportion. I'm using contrasting sizes, contrasting scale to show you this couple, right? And so, wow, okay, that's great. That's a focal point. Awesome, right? And if this was an art history class, if I was your art history teacher, then I would have you write an essay and ask you, what are they looking at? You know, what is it that they're looking at? What's capturing their eye? And you can have 1,000 theories about it, right? But we won't jump into that in this class, right? But I will say that, you know, good designers kind of bring a little bit of that curiosity or that abstraction into their design, right? So as you get better as designers, you will find ways to kind of bring some curiosity or abstraction in your design and kind of engage the viewer in an interesting way. Does that make sense? So sometimes a figure's looking away and you don't know why. Or sometimes in a magazine cover, let's say, and they're looking straight at the camera, like they're looking at you. That says something. That's powerful. So, but proportion and scale is a principle, okay? Almost there, almost done, and then we'll take our break and do an exercise when we get back, guys. Okay, harmony is basically when all these elements, yes, Sylvia, it does guide your eye too. So that's a great technique as well. When people look at something, you can guide the viewer to look at that on a screen or a poster or advertisement or marketing of the sort. So that's a great, that is a clear strategy when it comes to design. Harmony. Harmony is like, hey, this is all coming together, right? This is all gelling. Why is that? Okay. And so, yeah, absolutely, Alex. Yeah. And harmony is all about like how these pieces come together. Okay. And so if I was to put like a 3D model of Mickey Mouse, or I put this anime character into this drawing, it would totally not go with it, right? And why? Well, it wouldn't go because you have to think about it in terms of the elements of art, okay? So when you look at this design and you think about colors, let's say, do we see a lot of certain types of colors happening all throughout? If you really look at this, like I would say, well, let's start. Do you see mostly dark colors or mostly light colors happening in this? Okay, I would argue that it would be mostly dark colors, right? So you see more of that. Oh, well, what kind of then shapes do you notice in this? Do you see mostly organic shapes or mostly geometric shapes? Oh, I see mostly organic shapes, Professor, like 80% more. That's harmony. Harmony is I see more of a certain element. I see more of that. I see more of that. Does that make sense? So the more you see an element, the more it comes together. So if a design doesn't look right, ask yourself, do you need more curved lines to balance it? Do you need more of a color, more of a shape, more of a size, more of this, more of that, so that things start to look like they relate to each other? So the more you see something element-wise, the more harmony you bring. Does that make sense? So that's how you make your design look good. It's like, well, how do I make it good? Oh, you bring more of the elements in and you do more of those elements. More lines, more shapes, more colors, or all of the above, okay? And that's harmony. It makes it works together because you see more of those elements. And people can't really describe it because they never have a class like this on the elements of art, okay? Now, variety. Now, if everything was the same, if we all look the same, if we all act the same, if we all talk the same, it'd be a pretty boring world. So we need to have little differences, and that's variety. So we as human beings still need some variety in our life. And so therefore, design must also reflect that. So we want to have enough harmony, enough of the same, but just enough of the differences to appreciate it. Does that make sense? So we also need a little bit more of the differences. And when you dip into varieties, well, variety is then the opposite of harmony. I add more things that are slightly different. I add a little bit more of a different shape, a different color. Wait a minute, Professor, didn't you just say, I know, I said that, right? But if you see this image here by Marc Chagall, I mean, he's using very different shapes, very out of proportion, right? It's a variety of proportions. It's a variety of geometric shapes to create this figure. Everything is out of whack, right? So there's not more of a shape, there's not more of a size, there's now differences, right? Don't get me wrong, Chagall has a harmony of red and yellow. You see more harmony. He's using color to bring it together, right? The color kind of brings it all together and gives it a sense of harmony. And his lines and his shapes are mostly organic. So he has organic shapes. He's got these curved lines. He's got red, he's got yellow. Great, but his proportions are completely out of whack. There's no proportion happening here for the most part, right? So that's his variety. He's like, you know what? I'm gonna make the proportions of all my shapes, even though they're similar and they all go, I'm just gonna throw the proportions off. And so that's how you bring variety. And so then you start to realize that, oh, my elements of art are actually kind of like my secret weapon. Because then I could just kind of tweak the dial. I could turn up my proportion. I could turn up the color or turn down the color. So think of your elements as like little dials that you could turn it up for variety if you want more variety, or you turn up less if you want more harmony. Does that make sense? And so you want to think of them as dials that you can turn up, but you have to know and understand them, okay? All right, then we have movement, okay? Now rhythm and movement is not a core of the 6 that I showed you, but it is good to have and good to know. Rhythm and movement is well, it stands out. It's a level of abstraction if you think about it. I see a flat object, a flat canvas, a screen, and it's and there's like things repeating on the page, and it's not moving. It gives me a sense of rhythm and movement. Don't get me wrong, we have animation and video now, we can animate stuff. But if I gave you a piece of paper and I showed you this image, you would say like, oh, it kind of feels like it's moving, but it's flat. This is a piece of paper, it's still. that you have to think about it for how it is back then. So rhythm and movement was really interesting when there was no animation. Does that make sense? So if there was no animation, the only way we can create a sense of movement was by repeating things and have it go through a pattern. So this by Marcel Duchamp, it looks like sort of like this wing or this figure, but they're kind of moving downward, right? So there's a sense of rhythm and movement. And so that's cool. It's interesting, right? You can do that. I find a lot of sports advertising and marketing has obviously a sense of movement, because sports is all about movement, right? You get excited when you watch people move during the game. And so this is a very fundamental core principle when it comes to sports entertainment design. I would say that you typically see more rhythm and movement happening in it, because you want to give an effect of that, of being in the game, right? But obviously, if you're doing things in nature, birds, flying, dancing, right? This is a wonderful principle to try to show a sense of movement, because life is all about movement. We move to live, right? And so when you look at Van Gogh's paintings, right, he gives us a completely different view of the world, right? You know, everything's constantly moving. Well, it's a still sky. It's a still, you know, the stars are still, but to him, you know, it's all in motion. It's moving. And so it gives us an interesting view of the world, and it changes our perspective a little bit, right? And we see things just a little bit differently. And that's really what good art, good design should do. It should make us think different, right? And take us into another direction, a positive one, I would hope. And so that would basically be your principles of design, okay? Now, I will give everyone a break, okay? When we get back, we're gonna do an activity together, okay? And we're gonna do the principles of design. We're gonna do a little writing exercise together. And then I'll let you guys go to select your images, okay? So we still have two major things we'll do after the break, is that we're gonna write down the principles of design as a sample. And then we're going to, in effect, release you to find images that are cool to you, so that you can write about them using the principles of design, okay? So let's take, what do we want? Do you want a 5-minute or 10-minute break? Because I feel like I've overloaded you. Principles of design has always been like a heavy
10-minute break.
Lakers going for 10. Okay, should we go for 10? 10 minutes sound good to everyone? So that we can kind of breathe and process the principles of design as we did. Okay, let's go 10 minutes, and then we'll check back at 8:25, okay? All right, guys, let's take a break. Okay, now a couple of things really quick before I continue. Any questions so far about principles of design? Whether it's anything small, anything minor, you know, you can type it in the chat and let me know. But theory is key, and I would probably say that it's some teachers can teach you really well, others not as well, because there's a lot to it. But I think at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, I think those 6 core principles are like key, right? And if you start there and work your way up, you will get better in the work that you do, okay? So it's not like there's more to it. I would say that it's more about like all the different ways you can do it, if that makes sense. So it's not that you're starting off with like ABC and then I don't tell you the rest of the alphabet. That is the alphabet, but it's how you mix the letters together that makes it the creative stuff, that makes it interesting, that makes it powerful, I would say. So hopefully that kind of gave you a little bit more of like, oh, I'm starting to get this world of design a little bit more, and we'll do more, right? But and fundamentally, that's what it breaks down to. I still look at design the same way. I still see things according to those principles: focal point, you know, contrast, what are the elements, the balance. And then it gets to a point when you do better that as you do more and more and you start building, where you start to actually like analyze and kind of critique and sort of like criticize graphic design out. Like just the other day, I was looking at a parking sign and I was like, man, the spacing of the lettering there and the do not park here, like that doesn't, like it bothered me, the space between the lines of the sign, and it wasn't aligned. And I was like, oh, okay, like that's how I know, I guess I'm really in tune, because I'm noticing what's not working versus the stuff that is working, if that makes sense, right? And so that's a part of it. And I will say most design in America is pretty bad. So if you're like, oh, I don't notice this or that, once you do this assignment, my hope is that you'll start to see just how bad it is mostly. And there's some good design, don't get me wrong. Like if you go to Disneyland, yes, that's like a great example, right? But when you go to other, other cities, sometimes design is always on the back burner, and so you don't notice it as much. But I guess but when you go to spaces where it's a focus, then you definitely notice it, right? I will say that, if you ever get a chance to travel, some of the best graphic design or just design generally is overseas in Europe. So I highly recommend, if you ever get a chance or when things start to open up and it's safe to travel to the countries, go to Europe. Europe has some amazing design, and that's built into the culture. European culture says design should serve a purpose to improve life, humanity, and be good to people. And whereas design in America says we need to make more money and make better products for people. Very different viewpoints, right? So the history of design, if you ever take graphic design history, take a look and definitely check it out, because capitalism, consumerism was birthed from design. And in a way, design is a political power in and of itself, if you kind of look at it from those terms. And so, but yeah, you can basically say that everything we know about consumer culture, about design, the jobs that we're about to get in the future, is all to drive to market something, to advertise something, to promote a business. It's all pushing towards a capitalism or some type of, purchase of something, right? And there's nothing wrong of selling and purchasing things, but I will say that in America, design looks at it as a purely capital, advertising, promotion, making money. And in Europe, they see it as, well, that's part of it, but it's really more about beauty and culture and bringing people to a higher level, and bringing a balance to all things, and making it look beautiful and inspiring, but informative at the same time. And so it's a very different mindset. And so definitely, when you get a chance, take a look. Gosh, I think they even have YouTube videos where you have people like walking through cities now. So, take a look at a city of choice. Italy, Germany, I think I've seen some of the best ones there. Switzerland, France. Just go to YouTube and take a look at those streetwalkers. When they go walking, and just go, it's big on your screen, and take a look around. You'll notice that there's some very, very good design, graphic design, architectural design. It's built into the culture. And so there is two completely different worlds. So I would say in this class that if you're very, very serious about design, I would definitely, and money was no option, I would say definitely study design in Europe, where, origin of art, right? Renaissance was in Italy. Study abroad in Europe when it's safe to do so, and compare the two, and you'll see a huge difference. And I think you'll appreciate both sides of the world, I guess you can say, and in other parts as well, but more so there. Okay, so I just wanted to give you some 2 cents, but the principles still apply in Europe. And of course, we saw it right now in the presentation. Those designs that we just saw were very European influenced, very much of the European influence, right? And so we know that this stuff applies in both hemispheres of the world, but I just wanted to give you my 2 cents on that. So graphic design in America is typically more of a Western capitalist type of graphic design, I guess you can say, to promote a product. And then and we'll do that. But at the end of the day, I want to tell a story that kind of enlightens and inspires. And I'm more of a European influence, I guess you can say. So I'll do more of that than not. And that's good, because we get a lot of influence from the East and from Europe, and they do with us as well. The minimalist design, which is very popular today, actually has its origins in Germany. And you can even argue in some ways in Scandinavia and Japan as well. So a lot of these origins are international in basis. We just pull and use them here in America in different ways. So just wanted to throw that out there. Okay. All right. So thank you guys for listening. I just wanted to kind of share my 2 cents. Let's talk about the principles of design, and let's actually take a look at the assignment. So I'm going to share my screen. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to do a quick exercise, and hopefully you can see my screen. So let me take a look here. Give me 2 seconds, guys. I lost my screen there for a second. And we're going to take a look at the principles, and then we're actually going to do a writing sample. So let's see here. Where are you? Here. Yeah, Keynote. Perfect. Okay. So we'll do an example together, and we're going to do sort of an exercise on how to write the principles of design. Okay, so we're going to do that together right now. I'm going to share this with you in a moment on, it's already on Canvas, but I'll also share it with you in the chat. But we're basically going to do a sample write-up using colors. And this is called the Jane Schaefer writing method. Basically, we're going to write a very long paragraph about the fox art, or the design that we saw earlier, which is the fox. And we're going to break it down and write according to the elements and principles of design. Okay, so we're going to do one together. We're going to color code it. Okay, and then we're basically going to give you guys some time to find some art. Technically, I think we'll probably be done for this evening. So Thursday, we're going to use pretty much the time in class to work on your principles of design. So it looks like Thursday will be no lecture, but rather more in-class time to work on your assignment. Okay, so if there's questions, issues, concerns, things like that, then I will be available for you, and we're going to use that whole session on Thursday to work on your assignment. Okay, and then hopefully that'll work. And if that works for you, you can give me a thumbs up emoji. Okay, principles take some practice. I'll say that right now. Okay, so the Jane Schaefer writing method, I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but basically there was a teacher named Jane Schaefer who found that her students were not writing essays or bodies of paragraphs very easily. So she devised a method using color, hey, a designer mind. And she said, I'm gonna use color to communicate how to write essays and paragraphs, okay? And so the format is on screen, but it's very simple. Basically, whenever you're writing an essay or a sort of a paragraph, typically you start off with the topic sentence, which is the very top here in green. And so your topic sentence is obviously your opener, which leads to your yellow, which is like your concrete detail. And then you go deeper into the details by having some opinions and commentary, which is the pink or red on your screen, depending how it goes, followed by basically a combination of those yellow and reds, and mostly reds really, to get to a chunk, which is represented by that orange. And then you close out with a concluding sentence, which is sounds similar to the opening sentence, and that's your green on the bottom. So it kind of flows according to that, right? And so when you look at the document, you're going to notice that, oh, the first sentence and the last sentence are the same color. Yeah, because they're kind of opening and closing and saying the same thing, right? So we're going to go through that. Yellow, the second sentence is yellow. That's basically principles of design and kind of overviewing that. And then the red is just talking about the core principles, right? Focal point, the contrast, the variety. You're going to basically call out the 6 principles within the red sentences. Does that make sense? So that paragraph is going to be 6 red, 2 green, 1 yellow. So 6, 7, 8, like almost 10 sentences roughly. Okay. And so that is one analysis for one piece of art. Okay. And don't freak out, because at the end of the day, you're writing about your favorite art. Okay. So we're going to do one of mine. And then you're gonna basically write like this for your 10 favorite images. Does that make sense? So you're gonna spend some time looking for some cool art, make sure it's exciting stuff that you enjoy, and you're gonna write about it. And at the end of the day, it's not gonna feel as hard because you're writing about the stuff that you like, okay? And you're kind of reverse engineering it. Okay, so if that makes sense, you give me a little thumbs up emoji. So make it sense, cool, gotcha, professor, let's just get this done. Let's put this together. Okay, great, let's put it together. We'll walk through this together. Okay, so let me go ahead and direct, and we will go to, let's take a look here to our assignment. And I'm gonna switch over and get that going. So let's take a look. Google Chrome. Here we go. Okay, so let me go ahead and share this document with you right now. So we'll do this together. And I'm gonna copy the link. And I'm gonna put this into the chat. So sample document for practice. And when you click onto it, you should see something that says make a copy or log in and then make a copy. And you can open it up. Once you have the document open on your screen, you give me a little thumbs up emoji. And then we'll kind of go forward from there, okay? Okay. Now this sheet in front of you is only a one-time practice, okay? When we do our principles of design, then what you're gonna basically do is create a Google document, and I'll see if I can try to find it with you. But you're basically going to create a Google document where you're gonna, or a Google slide where you're gonna create write about all 7 images. And I'll show you in just a moment what that particularly looks like, but let's just do this document together. This is a one-time sheet, a one-off sheet. So you're only gonna do this once on this document with me, okay? So let's go ahead and break this down. And we're gonna do the Jane Schaefer writing methodology, okay? So you'll notice that on the top, that it's kind of pre-written, but it's using similar terminology, but it's another image if I understand correctly. Yeah, it's more for the tree. But we're gonna follow this exact same format, basically. Almost like word for word there, okay? So we'll start off with the green, okay? So for the fox image, you can write below that. But basically for the fox image below that, what we're gonna do is just open up. We're just gonna start with a simple opener. In this image, there are, in this image of the fox or in this image, there are multiple principles of design. So just generalize it, okay? If you wanna use green, go for it, right? So I'm gonna write this really big. You don't have to, I'm just gonna do it for the sake of this presentation so that you guys can see it very clearly at home, right? And we'll go there. So in this image of the fox, or in this image of, by the artist, if you know the name, that's great. We see multiple principles of design. Okay, period. So green is a general statement. What are you going to talk about? Well, I'm going to talk about the principle of design in this image. Okay, so very general, very basic. It's kind of like a conversation. Okay, hey, we're going to talk about principles of design. Okay, what do you want to tell me? Oh, well, I'm going to switch my color to the yellow, and that's my what we call like our commentary or statement, which is, let me make a note of that. Where in the commentary or the statement we want to make is that in this image are multiple principles of design. The principles of design seen in this image are, and then we're going to say the 6 core principles. Okay. which are contrast, okay, emphasis or focal point, whichever you feel comfortable with. So contrast, focal point, okay. What else do we notice within that? Contrast, focal point, balance, okay. Proportion, okay, comma, harmony, and variety. Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, 6 core. So all your slides are going to generally start pretty much these in the same way for these two sentences, right? Because all your images are going to have the core 6. So it's pretty much a formula at that point. Those first two sentences are pretty much going to sound the same. You know, make it interesting, throw in the title, right? If you know the title. But that's how we start, those two sentences, okay? Now we're gonna switch to red. And we said that the red was gonna be the concrete details, right? And so that's your 6 principles, okay? Every sentence in red, it represents one principle, okay? So going back to the fox, let's start off with the contrast. So what type of contrast do we see in the fox image, okay? I'm gonna pull up my contrast sheet here, which I'll give you right after we do this. But in my contrast sheet, there's 3 types of contrast here, right? And the 3 types of contrast that we see here are contrast of size, contrast of shape, and contrast of color. Everyone will get a copy of this also, okay? But I'm just gonna use it so that you don't overwhelm your screen with mine, okay? So if contrast is sizes, shapes, and colors, then what is that fox image then? What kind of contrast would you say the fox has, that painting of the fox? Is it 1, 2, or all 3 of them, would you say? I would probably say it's all 3 of them, right? Sizes, shapes, and colors. So we're gonna mention that, we're actually gonna say that. And so let's include that in the write-up. So I'm gonna go back here. Okay, if you have a printer, you technically would be like on your table. And we're gonna see here, switch to red, the contrast found in the image is a contrast of size, shape, and color. Or we could even be more specific and we could say a contrast of size, geometric shape, and red/black color, right? Now I'm getting a little bit more specific, okay? And so the more specific you are, the better you'll be with the write-up, okay? So contrast found in the image is contrast of size, geometric shape, and red-black color, or red, red-black colors, I would say, okay? So sentence 1 is done. Sentence 2, we're gonna go to focal point. Okay. Now, we can start the sentence differently using the transition statement, right? I kind of messed up. I actually said that the principles designed this and the contrast found in the image is that. I'll just move on to transition and say second, okay? Second, we see a focal point within the geometric shapes of the fox's head, or fox's head. The fox's head? Fox's head. Right? Period. So focal point is mentioned. I'm just calling out what is the focal point, which is the fox's head. Okay? So focal point, contrast happening there. Okay. All right, continue on with the next one. Third, the balance of the painting, or just adding a little bit of variety there. So third, the balance of the painting is, well, let's kind of take a look. Would you say that this is symmetrical or asymmetrical, the fox's image? Okay, and remember how we do that, right? The easy way to do that is to simply draw a red box, right? Kind of small, cut it down the middle, and what's on the left is different than what's on the right. So based on what we just did in the image, that little tiny red square, would you say it's symmetrical or asymmetrical? I would say it's asymmetrical, right? Because what's on the left does not equal what's on the right. And can you see that a little bit clearly? Is that kind of making sense? I know it's kind of small, but right? You see sort of like this curve happening here. Obviously, the fox's head is predominantly happening on the left, but you know, these elements that I'm kind of highlighting is definitely not on the right-hand side, right? I mean, the fox's head is like right there on the right. So there are differences on the left and differences on the right, okay? Therefore, it is asymmetrical, okay? So we'll say clearly that this design is asymmetrical, okay? And the third, the balance of the painting is asymmetrical. So due to the various forms or shapes on the left portion of the canvas or design or window. I'm just adding a little bit more flair or to the words just to kind of make the sentence stand out a little bit. Of the canvas, you could even say, you know, on the left of the canvas versus the right side, right? But you just want something to indicate that it's different on the left than on the right, okay? Now we move into the fourth principle, which is going to be proportion and scale, right? So let's try to add a transition statement. I love transition words. Transition words are basically different ways of starting your sentences, right? So a little tip is never start every sentence with the. It's not gonna sound good, and you wanna basically like write as if you're articulating and speaking about it. And so the great ways to add is down here on the lower right. So I'll share this with you. It's also on Canvas, but you'll get this right after this exercise. But, you know, especially also in particular, furthermore, in addition, indeed, of course, certainly, these are great ways to add emphasis to your structure, to your write-up, to kind of talk about that, okay? So if that's the case, let this be your best friend, okay? And so allow that there. And I know some of us might, you know, our writing skills are in different places. If your writing skills is great. If your writing skills is not there, this will help you big time, okay? So I'm just gonna use in addition, furthermore, indeed, we'll go with that, okay? So I'm gonna start off that sentence and say over here, in addition, the viewer, which is us, you, can see I guess we can say proportion and scale, or well, we can see some scaling and proportion. In addition, we, the viewer, can see some evidence of scaling and proportion within the top area of the image. Basically saying like that fox's head has some type of scaling and proportion. Or you could even say that Fox's head has some scaling and proportion. Again, it's a spectrum, right? 0 to 100. So wherever you see it, call it out and make a note of that. All you need is one indication of that, okay? Okay, almost there. Okay, now we still have harmony and variety, okay? Harmony and variety do throw people off. I'll be honest about that, because people get a little bit more confused about it, okay? Harmony is, do you see a lot of the elements, okay? So for the fox, okay, we're gonna say, what do we see a lot of? Well, I think the obvious is true. We see a lot of geometric shapes, right? So we can say there's a harmony of geometric shapes, right? Lots of geometric shapes. We can say that there is a lot of bright colors, right? We can say there is a lot of reds. We can say there's a lot of, straight lines or angled lines. You pick, you get to pick, okay? My first instinct is like just saying a lot of just geometric shapes, okay? So there's a harmony of geometric shapes and colors, okay? So I'm just gonna say furthermore, the designer or the artist creates a sense of harmony using geometric shapes and bright or high value colors. You can say bright colors or high value colors, whichever you feel comfortable with. We'll just say bright colors, using geometric shapes and bright colors throughout the piece. And again, that wouldn't be sufficient. And also, I'm going to use that as well for the next one. Also, we're going to talk about variety, which is the differences. And so as similar as things are in the elements, there's also a variety. So we have to zoom in a little bit and say, okay, well, what is there some variety of? I mean, there's a lot of geometric shapes happening here. A variety, I would say there's probably a variety of angled lines. That's almost the same as geometric shapes, but geometric shapes could still be like squares and things like that. So we could say that. You could say varieties of colors, but I mentioned in the previous sentence that there's harmony of colors, but I kind of shot myself there with it. So I have to find another element, whether it's going to be lines or values or textures or space. I think space is evident because the spacing of all these shapes is very out of whack. Wouldn't you agree? It's like everything is spaced out in different directions, and one fox is going one direction, the other direction. So I think there is a variety of space happening here, and there is no sense of space in a way. They're just turned in all these directions. So the spacing or the direction is very vast, right? It's very different. So I would say that there is a variety of space moving in all directions. Does that make sense? So the space is definitely being out there. Also, the space is vast, or there is also there is a high variety also. We'll say there is a variety of space and direction to which the image is veering towards, almost like an abstraction or surreal. And surreal meaning like dream-like, okay? And that's actually something I wanted to mention as well, which is abstract and surreal. When it comes to, well, we'll finish that. The difference between abstract and surreal, I would say, is that surreal is more dreamlike and abstract is like no basis in reality. So we'll mention that briefly in a couple seconds when I show you the sheet. Okay, we'll finish that. So now that we're set with our 6 core principles, then we're going to come back to green. And if you notice it here in your document, I put a little bit of red in the first one, but the last sentence is basically a repeat of the first sentence or slightly varied. It is evident that many principles of design are working within the design to create a pleasing and strong image, okay? Saying the same thing as the first green sentence, but slightly different. Does that make sense? So we're just adding a little bit of variety to the sentence, but we're gonna switch this back to green. And we're basically saying, right? Or you can say in conclusion, okay? In conclusion, this image or this design is a strong example of the principles of design. Okay, period, boom. Okay, so just like that, we sort of wrote the appropriate way of writing this, okay? And what's kind of interesting is that we've deconstructed it, right? We broke it down and then we brought it back together and described it. My hope is that when we're done with this class, is that you guys can talk about your designs or any design with this level of of detail, of emphasis. You will come out a much stronger just designer being able to articulate this, okay? Because you'll be able to talk the talk as much as walk the walk in your design. Does that make sense? So can you imagine, okay, if you can communicate like this, right? If you can write it, that means you can talk like this, and that would be amazing, right? I don't know why I have that song. So overall, you'll just be so much of a better communicator if you can talk like this in your presentations or just about your work in general, okay? So, in this image, we see multiple principles of design. The principles of design we see in this image are contrast, focal point, balance, proportion, harmony, variety. It goes really well with this song, doesn't it? And then the contrast found in the image is a contrast of size, geometric shape, rendered by colors. Secondly, we see a focal point within the geometric shapes of the fox's head. Balance of the painting is asymmetrical due to the various forms of on the left portion of the canvas. In addition, the viewer can see evidence of scaling and proportion within the top area of the image. Furthermore, the artist is creating a sense of harmony using geometric shapes, bright colors throughout the piece. And at the same time, there's a variety of space, direction to which the image is veering towards almost a surreal-like quality. In conclusion, this image is a strong example of the principles of design. Now, imagine talking to a client like that about the work, and they argue with you saying, hey, this is not good. Oh, really? In conclusion, I see this image, right? Do we see where we're trying to go with this? So this solves two major issues in the designer's life, which is one, how do I break that other work down so I can bring it into my own? Two, how do I articulate and communicate positively to my client, to my viewer, in a meaningful way that is not disrespectful? This is your answer, okay? Does that make sense? So there's always a method to my madness, and so we're hitting two areas. You're gonna get stronger, you're gonna deconstruct, you will understand design, and you'll be a better thinker, a better critical thinker, in addition to a better communicator through your writing. Boom, drop the mic. And then, thousands of dollars for the job. So that's the idea, okay? So that pretty much does it in terms of my breakdown. What you guys are gonna do is basically, when we go to the assignment, I give you all the wonderful tools, right? I give you the presentation link. I just did the writing prompt sheet with you, so we did that together. And I'm also and I just showed you the transition sheet, right? Which talks about the transition words, how you start a sentence. And you now have your own principles of design cheat sheet, which comes with principles and elements of design. So if you have a printer at home, print this out, hang it up in your car, put it up on your wall. This stuff is the stuff that you're gonna need throughout this entire semester. So hang this up, and try to memorize this as best you can and practice on the daily, okay? So you'll have that. And I also give you some the presentation for today, so you have that as a reference. And of course, the video will be up and running tomorrow morning. You get to look for work. You get to look for designs now. So basically, what you're going to create is a Google slide presentation, and in that slide presentation, you're going to find 10 images of designs you find interesting. Okay, and I feel compelled to show one student example of that. So we'll go ahead and do that. So I can retrieve that. And it could be any 10 images that you want. It could be photos, it could be drawings, your drawings, paintings, designs, anything of that sort. And you can use that to your advantage. So let me see if I can pull up maybe Ashley's. She did a principles of design, and she used a good variety of different images. You're gonna create a template from scratch, okay? So you will build a template on the fly, so I can walk you through that really quickly. And you can design it however way you want, but basically you're gonna have a cover. You're gonna call that the principles of design, okay? And you get to go throughout the internet and basically look for images, and you're gonna write in the Jane Schaefer writing method for each of those designs, right? And Ashley is a former student, and she did anime and drawings, and she did the principles of design for these images, right? And she did that for each one of these, okay? And she talked about it. She had, opening statement, opening sentence, principles of design, what are the 6 principles in the 3rd sentence, right? So she wrote for each one of them, and this was stuff that images that she found interesting, cool, right? That she really liked. And so you're gonna do the same. And it doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be a theme, it doesn't have to be a specific genre. I mean, she went across the board, but she also stopped and did some, Romanesque paintings, right? So this is a really great opportunity just to explore and see some really cool art, and maybe for the first time deconstruct and understand what is it about that design that makes it really interesting to you. And now you get to know why, specifically with elements and principles. So here's a great opportunity to learn about what makes that design that you've always been curious about effective. Okay, so it is a vast play. You can go any direction: posters, drawings, illustrations, photographs, scenes from films, paintings. I think the only limitation is that we can't really do pottery or products because it's a 3-dimensional object and we don't have it unwrapped, so to speak, right? It's a photo of one section, so we can't necessarily do pottery per se, but more flat 2-dimensional images I think would be okay. T-shirts, you can do t-shirts, you can do stickers, anything really, it's really anything. So because the principles will show up in just about anything 2-dimensional that is a successful design. Okay, so that's that format. Okay, would anyone want me just to walk them through creating a document in Google Drive, just to show you how to create that new document or create a new Google slide? If you do, maybe you can give me a thumbs up. How do I just go to Drive and launch the Google slide? Anyone want me to show you that? Okay, cool. We know how to do that. All right, guys. So that's going to be our method. So you will turn it in. You can design this as any way you want. Notice that it's 10 slides plus the cover equals 11. So you're making 11. It's an 11 slide presentation. Slide 1 is the cover, and then 2 to 11 is your images. So you're looking for 10 images, okay? And that's the total number of slides. 10 plus cover equals 11 slides, okay? All right, beautiful. All right, guys. And again, assignment is on Canvas under the Elements and Principles of Design. So everything is available for you there. The very bottom link here where it says online museums, if maybe you have no idea where to look and you need a little bit of help looking at art, where here at the bottom it says online museums. I do kind of give you a little link to Google, and Google has a nice collection of designs and art. It's called Google Arts and Culture, where they basically try to go to all the museums around the globe, take some pictures, and they put it up online. So if you need a place to start, then feel free to go to the Google Arts online gallery and take a visit. Maybe you want to go click onto map here on the top, and maybe you want to visit a museum somewhere in France. I don't know. And you want to go take a look at that piece in France or that museum in France. So if you go in and zoom in, you can click onto a specific museum in Paris, and there's a lot of them. And basically it'll take you to a collection found on that location, and you can write about that specific piece of art there, which is really cool because I didn't know that Google was now capturing like urban art. So that's kind of nice. So yeah, so feel free to use, that's cool. I didn't know they actually started adding urban art there. So that's a great feature. So you can literally take a screenshot of this or basically screen print that and place that into your Google presentation or your Google slide. Okay, so you can use that as a resource, and that is awesome. That is totally fine with me. Okay, you can use Google Images, sure. Does it have to be a known artist? No, it does not have to be a known artist. Could it be your art? Yes. It can be anything. Any successful piece of design will have the principles of art, no matter if it's famous or not, period, point blank. And that's sort of the point of the exercise, okay? So if you want to go to Mexico, you can go to Mexico and take a look at Frida Kahlo's work, and you can totally talk about her work and mention that as well. It is endless where you can go with this, okay? And that could be found on Assignment Center or Canvas under online museums to explore the virtual art gallery, okay? So I give you everything you need, everything you could possibly need. And on Thursday, beginning of class, we're just gonna jump in, look for some art, and I'll take a few moments to kind of recap and review, and basically we're gonna use the rest of the time to write, okay? So it will be a writing session during that time frame. Okay, all right. If you have any questions, comments, issues, or concerns, you can unmute your mic or you can type it in now, and we will be set. Okay, Laker, did you? I noticed your hand up. You had a question.
Okay, hi Professor. I'm not sure what's the value-based pricing assignment.
Oh, value-based pricing. We turned it in, and do you need help uploading that, or where to store that on Canvas?
Like answering the questions. So.
Okay, we'll go into a breakout room and we'll kind of talk about those specific questions. So I'll answer that one-on-one with you. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Very cool. All right, guys. Well, then that'll conclude it for this evening. If there's any issues or concerns, then I'll be more than happy to answer them. Shoot me an email anytime between now and Thursday. If there's anything that you need, just drop me a line. I'm more than happy to answer those questions for you. Okay? All right, guys. We will see you then. You guys are officially dismissed. Have a good night and start looking for some art. It should be fun to find. We'll see you on Thursday.
Thank you, Professor.
All right, guys. We'll see you then. Take care.
Have a good day, Professor.
You too, James. We'll see you guys soon. Okay.
Oh,
Make sure
wait.
to look for some art.
So wait, it can just be any art, right? Just want to make sure.
Any image, any art of your choice.
Okay, then. I
Okay.
just want to make sure about that.
Definitely. Yeah. Anything that you wish. All right. We'll see you on Thursday.
All right. Have a good day.
You too.